Okay, I think we're good to go on this front.
Cool.
Welcome, Molly Soda. My name is Francesca Altamura. I'm a curator and organizer based in New York. And I've been invited by Martin Mayorga and Vanessa Morel, founders of Daddy Eagle Art, who have co-curated with Zabia Jabbar, artist and founder of Her Visions, Control the Virus Volume 3, which is a year-long digital exhibition. And you're the first artist that will be on deck for this year-long exhibition. So we can have a bit of a Q&A to sort of tease out some of the more pragmatic details behind your work. So why don't you go ahead and describe it for us, if you can, in short.
Sure. So, Impression is the title of the work. And, oh, do you want me to describe my actual work
Let's
or just the piece?
go with the Data Eagle piece.
Okay, good. So the piece is called Impression, and it's a web-based work. It's essentially a website that is sort of ever changing in this kind of continuous loop. So right now, the piece kind of changes its state, if you will, every week. So when you first kind of like encounter the piece, you're seeing a very kind of broken, abandoned, defunct website. So you're seeing a lot of empty, kind of broken images, and there's not a lot going on. But then on top of that, I really wanted to simulate kind of like the sort of equating like digital space to physical space. So I wanted it to feel physically sort of like an empty lot. So there's a lot of trash, like litter. There's like a lot of weeds growing or like invasive plants growing all over the space. And when you first get to this space, you are given 4 options as the user. And so it's sort of like a little gamified experience where you're able to kind of leave an impression on the space yourself. And so the 4 things that you can do is you can plant a flower, you can pick a weed, pull a weed, which will remove the weeds from the space. You can leave litter, or you can pick up trash. And so it's kind of up to like the user to do whatever they want. So I kind of have like an idea of how the space is going to look, but it's super variable depending on what the user interaction with the space is, which that was like a really important part of it for me. And then as time moves on, there are sort of things that are out of the user's control that are happening kind of in the background as time is moving forward. So you might start with this empty lot, and then it moves into kind of a garden, or like thinking about even in physical space, like an empty lot turning into a community garden, for example, like something that's been cared for and is very pleasant and whatnot. But also thinking about kind of like the lifespan and the way that websites like move and fluctuate and change over time as they start to gain traction. So there's always like this sweet spot with the website where it goes from like kind of bare bones or defunct or not really a thing, not really known about, to it starts to gain traction and user interaction, and it turns into kind of like this more functional best version of itself. But then it sort of hits this tipping point where the website then needs to become profitable, or like all of these other sort of influences start to go into it. So then once you kind of get to this third stage, you're starting to see ads. And I was really thinking about like also just like trends and design. So thinking about kind of going from this very stripped down, very simple web design in the beginning to going into sort of like more millennial advertising aesthetics, like thinking about those sorts of things that start to really flatten everything, and kind of thinking about how everything kind of looks the same online right now. Like there used to be this really like beautiful ability for like customization and personalization and all this, and then everything starts to kind of become this really flattened aesthetic, and then the website eventually turns into just like online shopping. And so you kind of get this online shopping experience at the end where you're kind of fed these weeds that you were once pulling in the beginning back to you, and they're being sold back to you, kind of in the vein of like any sort of millennial plant website that's happening, you know, now that you can access now. So then it resets and is a continuous loop.
I mean, it sounds incredibly technical in the back end of it. So I'm curious to hear, you know, how was your artistic hand sort of used in this process? Was it coding? Was it conceptualizing? Can you explain a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so when I came up with the piece, I'm not a coder by any means. I know like very simple things, probably just from teaching myself simple HTML when I was like a teenager, but beyond that, not much. And so when I came up with the piece, I was definitely being super like, I just like was like, I'm gonna come up with whatever I want and then I'll figure out like how to get it done. So basically I came up with the concept and then I came up with all of the art for it. And then I found a developer whose name is Justice, who has been working on actually like dealing with making my vision like a functional thing. Because, excuse me, for me, it was like, it was a struggle like trying to articulate what I wanted because I couldn't figure out like what the terminology was. And then like when I started trying to find developers, it was like someone would be like, "Oh, I'm a front end developer. Like you need someone that does like back end and like out and this and this and this." When I would start to like explain things, and then I was like, it's definitely been a test in like communicating like, you know, in my terms, and then trying to translate that into terms that like make sense to someone who like is coding.
Totally. I totally understand. I mean, it's a totally different lexicon from like the artist or curator's
Mm-hmm.
perspective to like a creative technologist. So yeah, kudos for managing that. I'm curious to know about time in relation to the work because, you know, as this is, there's a lot of similarities between it being a year-long digital exhibition and how, you know, the day-to-day changes are sort of happening on the site and the week-to-week maybe
Mm-hmm.
in your work. Can you explain how that came about?
Yeah, so I just really wanted to make something that felt like it would need to be visited multiple times. I feel like I feel like that's an interesting way to sort of play with something. Like I feel like when we interact with work, we kind of look at it one time and maybe we'll reference it again like a couple years later when we're thinking about that work or whatever it is. But for me, it was really important because time itself is important for the piece, just because I wanted to really document these kinds of changes that are happening in front of us online all the time. So I think online, the internet, like the internet, time on the internet is so hyper rushed, like it moves so quickly, like there's like, and we're not always like aware of it. Like for example, like I was looking at an archive of like a YouTube video. I like looked up a YouTube video on Web Archive today actually, and I looked at it from like 2006 and I was like, oh my god, this looks so different. And I had like no concept, like I don't remember that YouTube used to look like that, because things are sort of gradually changing in front of us all the time, and it's subtle. Like whenever there's like a rollout or like a new feature, like yeah, we notice it, but we quickly, very quickly like learn how to integrate that into like the way that we use the web. And so for me, I've been always really interested in like documenting those subtle changes. And for me, this is kind of like a condensed version of that. So like this is only a month, but the cool thing is that people will be able to come and kind of visit it multiple times and to really get the full effect. Because if you go to it one time, like yeah, you might be able to like do some stuff, but like it might not really inform your reading of the page until you've really seen it in all of its stages.
Let's talk about these trends that you're dealing with in the work. You know, you and I, in our previous conversation, we definitely differ in terms of plant care. And, you know, I've killed houseplants before, even though I love them, but I just, the
Mm-mm.
apartment sucks and with lighting, but you're like a really good plant parent, I guess. So yeah, is there anything you can say to sort of these like quote millennial trends, not only with the plants, but maybe also these designy storefronts that are like
Mm-hmm.
down and minimal, you know, which like is how your work also your it sort of conceptually deals with that sort of look.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, can you talk about these? Like, why are you so interested in them? They've obviously been it's been a key component to your previous works as well.
Yeah, I think it's really been a nice combination of all of my interests this piece because I'm interested in like the internet, like the movements in the internet, but I'm interested in also like I've been really interested in plants in general and also just like internet trends. So right now we're kind of in this timeline where plants are very like house plants are very, very popular. We're really in a houseplant boom, and I think part of that has to do with the pandemic because people are home more, they're caring for, they want things to care for. It's like they have more time, essentially. But we were already moving in that direction anyway, just like design wise and like aesthetically, like it's a thing. And it's gone in waves. Like in the 70s, there was like a huge houseplant kind of aesthetic craze, and I feel like it's just cycling back in, which my work is about cycles too. So it felt like the right thing to do. But when I kind of conceptualized the piece, I wasn't even thinking about it ending in a storefront. It's kind of where I started building the piece from. But when I first came up with the piece, I was thinking about the empty lot. And so I've been really interested in like invasive plants and weeds, or I guess they're the same thing, but also just thinking about, I mean, a lot of reasons, like, for example, the houseplants that we have in our homes, a lot of them would be considered invasive somewhere else, like in a tropical region where they come from. And then I was thinking, like, how weird would it be to sell like a dandelion in a store in like Puerto Rico, or maybe dandelions are in Puerto Rico, but like, you know, in Borneo or something. I don't know. But like, just thinking about this and also thinking about how invasive plants are also a kind of symbol of like colonization or like colonialism, and then thinking about sort of like the gentrification of online spaces. So they felt like related to me in my mind, and like the thread is there for me anyway, but thinking like the only reason like this invasive plant got here is because like someone brought it over, and whether it was to sell it as an ornamental and then it got out of control, whether it was to control a species, like another invasive species, and it got out of control. Like there's so many ways that like all of this stuff is tied together, and so it was really important for me to kind of like take that symbolism of houseplants and like millennial aspirational aesthetics, but then think about it in terms of invasive plants, and also just like what qualifies something as a weed. Like, is it just because we don't find it aesthetically pleasing on our lawn? XYZ. So, and then thinking also just about um, how everything is packaged in this sort of like very clean, simple way. Like even your pots are very clean and like aesthetically pleasing to that sort of sensibility. And looking at these websites that are selling plants that were once like, you know, if you walk down the street to the deli, like they might have like a $5 pothos right there. But if you go on like one of these plant, you know, millennial plant websites, they're selling you the same thing for like $30. So also just like that price tag and that sort of like, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. And it's sort of a good segue to what can be our final question for this mini interview, which is you have created what I think is cool merch that's sort of paired with the work. And this could also be sort of a millennial artist trend, you know, like it's also affordable
Mm-hmm.
for most of us to be able to buy some of your work.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, can you talk about that? What's sort of the intersection between the concept of the work and the merch? Yeah, that'd be cool.
Yeah, so for the merch, I developed this idea where I wanted to do a print, um, just because I don't do them very often, just because my work is so um, digital most of the time. So I wanted to do something physical that felt easy and accessible for people to purchase, and also like at a accessible price point. And so I'm doing these prints on like these matte sort of poster prints, and the design is sort of based off of the website itself. Like it kind of takes those elements, but I also wanted it to kind of be like a spin-off of, you know, those like Wildflowers of America posters, or like, you know, Wildflowers of insert the location. They have them for like literally every place. Um, and the idea was like, oh, I really want to make an invasive one that kind of like lists like invasive species of this region or whatever. And I'm predominantly dealing with invasive species here in the US and like in the Eastern US. They're going to look completely different wherever you are. And so I wanted to make kind of one of those like groupings of wildflower content posters, but I also wanted it to kind of like exist in the aesthetic of the beginning stages of the website with the broken links and kind of like the empty windows and that sort of thing. So I wanted it to feel overgrown, but then I also have everything kind of labeled and have kind of like these cute little like comments everywhere about the plants and whatnot. And then with the piece, with the merch itself, it also comes with a little packet of seeds, of white clover and red clover seeds, which are considered weeds here, but they're also kind of beneficial plants because they attract pollinators and they fix nitrogen in the soil. So I wanted to, you know, give people these things that, like, you know, you don't really buy clover seeds. They're like everywhere. So I wanted to give people these little like tokens essentially that kind of came with the print itself.
I love that. That is going to be very helpful for me as a shit plant owner to be to have this and have it grow in my home. Well, thanks, Molly, for hanging out, and yeah.
Cool, thank you. Yeah.